Hey there, just trying to get all this set up. So let me see. Hey everybody. All right, I'm gonna hang out here for a couple minutes, just trying to get everything positioned. All right, I'm doing this on two different devices, so if I look here or here, I'm switching back and forth. But yeah, I'll just give it a minute to get things caught up and make sure everything's going okay. Also, you may totally hear my kids in the background. It's been an adventurous day, whereas I was telling one friend the polite way to say it is my kids are very well rested. So, yes, and I just kicked one of my son's dump trucks underneath the car, or underneath the table. So, pretty fun. Yeah. So, we've been wanting to talk a little bit more about what's going on, how do we live in the midst of this changing time. And I had a really good conversation with a friend of mine the other day. Bears roaring like a lion in the other room. So you may hear that, but that's just part of it. So, fun times. But anyway. But yeah, so we're just I was talking with him about what are some of the things that we can learn through this time, since we've never gone through anything like this before. Also, I was talking to him about how this is actually the first worldwide major event that has actually taken place in the digital age, which is pretty interesting when you think about it, because previously during other pandemics there was not the such rapid transfer of information. Now, we have to fight not being on. Social media has skyrocketed since this thing started. I think it gives people a sense of connection, but I also think it's people's fear, and so they want to try to garner as much information as they can. And so that's a pretty interesting thing to see, like, how is our culture, how is our society functioning in the midst of this, and what is happening. And so I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and she just asked a really interesting question of, what do you think God wants us to learn from this? And I think that is a question that we should all be asking. I saw as well, someone had posted, one of the saddest things about this will be if we go through this whole thing and come out the other side unchanged. And the more I think about that, the more kind of profoundly convicting that is, of how are we going to let this change us in a good way. So I just wanted to share a couple observations this morning about kind of what I've noticed, and some of this may go very Wendell-Berry on you. If you don't know Wendell-Berry, look him up. Great quarantine read on life and what all is going on. So I think one of the things that's fascinating to me has been the pace has greatly slowed down for the entire world. And that's really fascinating. But what is more fascinating, rather than just everything slowing down, has been also to watch what is happening in nature. It's really cool to kind of look and check out. But like in Wuhan, there's a story of, there's a woman that lived, I think, on the 23rd floor. And she's an expat living in Wuhan, and said that for the first time in 7 years since the factory shut down, she has actually been able to hear birds. She hasn't heard birds in 7 years because of all the factories and all the pollution, but she can actually hear birds. And then there's a really cool one. You can look up pictures of this too. But in Venice, since all this has died down and quarantine has happened in Italy, the canals in Venice are actually running clear. And so I was thinking about that the other day, and a couple realizations. I think our society and our culture, we have just taken off, and we just keep going and going and going and making and making and making, and we're polluting. This isn't like a Greenpeace talk. we're polluting our souls by our man-made efforts to try for accomplishment, for productivity, and I think what you see happening in nature, I believe, is a physical representation of what God is longing to do in our hearts and souls. So the canals in Venice running clear because things aren't getting stirred up constantly by all the activity. If you think about what I was saying in Wuhan with they're hearing birds for the first time in 7 years and having blue skies, if you stop to pause and think about that, that means there's a 6-year-old in Wuhan that has never heard a bird. I think some of the things God is wanting to do through this time is for some people to see God in ways that they never have before. I think also He's wanting to cease striving and know that I'm God is what He says as well. I think He wants us to stop, let stuff die down, so that we don't just see things aren't as polluted with our efforts. And that's a really big struggle because so much of our culture has based our worth and value on what we do instead of who God is and who He is calling us to be. We're so caught up in what we do, and kind of what we're faced with right now is this kind of extreme pause. Like, you can't do that. Okay, well, what about if you can't do anything? What about if it's just left like this? And so I think that's why some of us are kind of in a panic of what, not only are we in a panic about the situation, we're in a panic because where our identity has come from for so long is now clouded, or is actually now clear, I would say. The things have started to settle, and the canals are beginning to run clear, and we're starting to see the reality of some things. And some of that, you see the beauty. So there's not as much soul pollution, and so you see some beauty that is coming through that. But I think also parts of it are hard to see. We're not as good as we thought in some areas. And everybody's like, oh yeah, stick together, love your neighbor, blah, blah, blah. And then pandemic happens and the shelves are bare and people have hoarded and there's shortages. You're starting to see a resurgence of people starting to make face masks and give and stuff like that, which is great. But our initial response was panic and was just looking out for ourselves. And I was talking to somebody else, and I said this a couple of times whenever we've gone through hard times in the past. It's like, as Christians, so many times we say we believe in God. We say so many times that we think He's all sufficient, He's there for us, and He loves us. And this is actually when that gets tested. So times like now are where Christians need to put their money where their mouth is. You have said this for years. Now is the time you live that out. And so, do you believe what you have said for at least a century, since something like this has happened in our world? Do Christians really believe what they say? Are you really going to live differently? And what can you do? And so I think there's a hard wrestling with what does that look like. I think a lot of us may want to live this way, but I think we also don't know how, and we don't want to admit that sometimes. But reality is we don't know what to do. And so I talked the other day about, and I'll just kind of reiterate it. Two things that have kind of really helped me through hard times in the past have been. Whenever several years ago, totally got the wind knocked out of me through losing a really good friend, and it was just this chain of events that happened. And so during that time, it was very dark. I started to wrestle with, like, why are we even here? Where is God in all this? What does He want to do? And so went back to the beginning, to Genesis, and started to think through, what is God's purpose for us? And we're made in His image. And so if we're made in His image, what does God look like? Like, what was He doing at the beginning? And He was bringing life from death, and He was bringing order from chaos. Adam and Eve were always supposed to leave the garden. The issue is how they left. So they chose to do things their own way. And so the image got marred, and they left under a curse instead of a blessing. But they were always supposed to leave. And what they were supposed to do was go out and to, in a sense, make the whole world a garden. So in times like this that are chaotic, in times like this that are hard, when you don't know where to take the next step, ask yourself the question: how can I bring life from death, and how can I bring order from chaos? Sometimes that's as simple as cleaning up the sticks in your neighbor's yard. I believe God is glorified in these physical representations of order from chaos, just as He is like in others. This is an example. This is how you live this out in a practical, tangible way for people to see. Is we do these basic things: order from chaos, life from death. You see someone struggling, you help out and do what you can. The magnitude of social media and all these other things can make you feel incapacitated because you see this great need, but you're reminded, like, I'm at home here in my apartment, like, what can I do? And so you see this magnitude, but you feel depleted or incapacitated, when the reality is there are needs all around you. And so one of the things Brooks and I are going to try to do is we look around, and kind of all around us are people who are deemed high risk. And we just built our house out here in Carnes, and we're like, God, what have you given us? Like, we don't know what to do, but what have you given us? And we have some land, and we're like, okay, we have a lot of friends that are servers that work in retail and have lost their jobs. And so what is something that we can do? And so we started about, like, how can we bring life from death? How can we help cultivate hope? And so God laid it on our heart to do this garden. We were going to do a little garden anyway, but we feel like God wants us to make it a big garden. And some of that is a couple different reasons for why we're doing a garden. One is that it is a physical, going back again to the beginning, it is a physical representation of hope. It is something that you can see. Growth is a process. Growth takes time. So honestly, this garden is a spiritual discipline for me and for Brooks. And with our kids, it's something that we can see. It is a sacrificial thing. Get out, take work. But the fruits that come from that, we share with our neighbors and those that will be in need. And so that is a very tangible step. I don't know what to do with this. Like, nobody has ever lived through this. So, but what can I do? How can I steward well what God has given me and take that step? Because I think through this time, He has allowed the whole world to stop. And they're starting to ask questions. What are we doing with ourselves? What is really valuable? Where does my significance come from? There's a lot of buzz around, like, activity and what we do and these different types of things, like all these shows and everything, and that's fine, that's good. You also see the significance of art. side note, but you see the significance of art in a hard time is everybody's like, I want to see something pretty. That's why artists are important. But as they remind you of hope. But in the same way, like things have calmed down. So how can we remind ourselves of truth? There's a woman, Teresa Dunn, in Knoxville, and she's an amazing counselor. But she did this video the other day, and one of the things she said is, we got to make sure that in times like this, we are gazing at Christ and glancing at our circumstances. Because what I feel like, what I do all the time, is I gaze at my circumstances. I gaze at Google News. I gaze at what all is going on. And I glance at Christ of like, oh yeah, what did God say? You know, and it's just this quick thing instead of taking time to actually sit and remember God's truth and who He is. So for those of you that are just kind of come on, I was talking about at the beginning how you see like in Wuhan, since things have stopped, since the factories have stopped, that they're now having clear skies, birds are singing. And there's a woman that said, you know, she's lived there for 7 years and she's never heard a bird. But now she does. And then in Venice, since everything has stopped and the boats aren't running, the dirt has died down, the canals are running clear, and swans have came back. And how I think, personally, that is a physical representation of what God is longing for us during this time. He wants our efforts to stop. And I think you see, like, pretty severely, He wants our efforts to stop. And He wants us to see, He wants us to observe Sabbath, He wants us to rest, He wants us to get our significance from Him. The amazing thing about that is that it didn't take a long time. It took like a couple weeks for the pollution in the canals to die down, but the swans came back super quick after that. And I think we have this thing of like, oh, I'm embarrassed by how much I've been relying on myself, so God will be mad at me. But in the reality, I think once we surrender and we cease striving, life returns pretty quickly. And that is a beautiful promise and hope that He gives us, that He won't abandon us and that He'll be there for us. So thank you all so much for tuning in this morning. I'll try to post this, so if you want to reference it and go back, feel free. And then also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask and let me know. It is so good to see y'all. Petra, love you. Greetings from in the Czech Republic. And Rachel, Tyler, Renee, Emily, everybody. It's so good to see y'all on here. So love y'all. God bless.